Hello, guys, and welcome into the C Team Pod. This is episode 23, and we're revealing the next team on our NFL Power Rankings, and it is going to be the Minnesota Vikings coming in at 21st. Coming up, the stuff that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about why the Vikings missed the playoffs last year. We're going to talk about the coaching change with them firing Mike Zimmer and hiring Kevin O'Connell, former Rams offensive coordinator, and whether or not that was the right decision. We're going to talk about the Vikings free agency decisions and what they did in the draft. We're going to talk about Kirk Cousins and if he's able to carry the Vikings to the playoffs, to a potential NFC North Division title. And then I'm going to talk about why I have the Vikings ranked 21st in the NFL. But yeah, they're 21st. I don't think they're going to be, super good this year, but let's start talking about, why they missed the playoffs last year. But before that, we're going to go through our rankings. At 32, the Houston Texans; 31, Jacksonville Jaguars; 30, the Detroit Lions; and 29, we have the Atlanta Falcons. Then the next set of four, we have the Chicago Bears, New York Giants, Carolina Panthers, and then the Commanders coming in at 25. This is where we start to get into like those teams that have some sort of potential. I think you got the Jets, that we have the Seahawks up a little bit higher. The New England Patriots that we just did about 2 hours ago. And now we're talking about the Minnesota Vikings coming in at 21st. So why did the Vikings miss the playoffs last year? The Vikings, they had a very... the Vikings, with how they were last year, they could have easily been about 4 or 5 games better or 4 or 5 games worse, just based off of their schedule. They were in, I think they only had a couple of games, only a handful, just counting 1, 2, 3 games that weren't decided by one score. I think there were 6 and 8 in games that were decided by one score. And so a lot of people think that that's going to flip around last year, just like looking at some of their wins. They beat the Detroit Lions by 2. They beat the Carolina Panthers in overtime last year. They were able to beat the Chargers, beat the Packers in Week 11. They were able to beat the Steelers and Chicago Bears by 8, both. And those were their last 2 one-point wins of the year. They beat Chicago by 2 touchdowns in the final week of the year. But a lot of their losses, especially early in the season, came in one-score games, right? They lost by 3 to the Bengals in the opener. They lost by 1 to the Arizona Cardinals in a game where their kicker missed a field goal. Shocker. The Vikings kicker missed a field goal in order to that could have wound up winning them that game. I believe they missed. In when they were trying to win that game. They got very unlucky. And they played, I think they played a pretty tough schedule, like looking back on it, right? Obviously, at the beginning of that year, having the Bengals as, a tough game in week 1, we wouldn't have seen that coming, right? The Cardinals, I think a lot of people did see coming, but then you look and, they played Cleveland. They played a Carolina team who was on the decline, but at least that early in the season, they were good. They played Dallas, Baltimore, who was a lot better before Lamar Jackson got injured, right? The 49ers who made it to the NFC Championship game, the Rams, the Packers twice. They played a lot of very good teams. And so I think they came out of the season with an 8-9 record. And a lot of that, again, with Kirk Cousins missing that second game at Green Bay, I don't think that they wind up winning that game. But again, when you're in that, that end of the season stretch, you need your quarterback, right? Week 17 is not the ideal week for a quarterback. Your quarterback who, is missing to miss, right? Especially when you're in the playoff hunt. I think that they had a very tough schedule last year. But again, they finished 8-9, and off the back of them finishing 8-9, they fired Mike Zimmer. And I think that was the right decision. I think that these are almost two separate questions, right? Because I think firing Mike Zimmer had to happen. He was not very good in his past or in his last however long as Vikings coach, right? And you've seen a lot of former players come out and talk about, how frustrating, toxic's maybe not the right word, but how bad that locker room was in terms of how he was running his ship. A lot of players are getting frustrated. it was very like toxic. It wasn't a good place for players to play, especially young players. If you read an article by Sports Illustrated, right around the time he got fired on January 10th, 2022, a lot of the players kind of came out and seemed pretty happy that, that he's not going to be there anymore. I think it's just, you look and Mike Zimmer I think he lost control of the locker room, right? I mean, he came in there to be a defensive guy, and their defense last year was pretty bad, right? Then you move on to the hiring of Kevin O'Connell, and I think they made the right call here. I think it's not going to pay immediate benefits, right? That's why I have him ranked so low. I think it's going to take a year or maybe a year and a half for them to get it clicking, or you might see it at the end of this year, but I think it's going to be too little too late for the Vikings, in terms of them being able to, run away with this division. Like you've seen a lot of people, Colin Cowherd's one, who you've seen, predict them winning the division by multiple games over the Packers, who have, I think Aaron Rodgers has only lost the division twice as a starting quarterback of the Packers. That could be wrong. It might be 4 times. Either way, I think that it might not pay immediate dividends hiring Kevin O'Connell. And I'll get into that a little bit later when I'm talking about why I have them ranked so low. But going into the free agency aspect of what the Vikings did, they were, I would say, fairly active in free agency, right? I mean, they signed a guy like Zadarius Smith, coming over from Green Bay. They signed Jordan Hicks. They signed Harrison Phillips. All of those guys making $5 million per year or more. Obviously, Zadarius Smith making 14. They signed Chandon Sullivan. They were very active. They re-signed Patrick Peterson. They brought back a veteran guy, who they expected to. They brought in a veteran guy who they think is going to be a good leader on the defense. But I think they also lost some guys. Tyler Conklin, that's when they lost to the Jets at tight end. I realized he wasn't necessarily their starter, but he was a solid guy. They're paying him around $7 million a year. I know that they kind of overpaid this offseason. The Jets did. They lost Anthony Barr. He's been a leader on that team for a very long time. A leader that I haven't particularly liked. I think they lost Xavier Woods. That's another guy that they lost, right? I think that they kind of even themselves out. I think that they should have tried to, maybe get a little bit younger on the defense. And obviously you do that through the draft, which we'll talk about in just a second, but they didn't really get younger. I mean, they let go of some of their older guys, but if you look at some of their signings, right? Zadarius Smith, he's almost 30. Jordan Hicks, he's 30. They re-signed Patrick Peterson. He's going to be 32 by the middle of the season. Chandon Sullivan, he's young, but he's not very good. There's a reason he walked, right? He's not very good. Signed a 1-year deal with them. They signed another, depth piece in Ty Smith at cornerback. He's 28. He's going to be 29 when the season starts. They re-signed him. They didn't get a whole lot better through free agency, especially you look, who they lost. And, if they wanted to go, and again, it's a new coaching staff, new regime, so we're just going to have to kind of figure out what their plan's going to be. But you take a look, and they didn't get much better through free agency. They got worse. They lost a young center in Mason Cole. They lost him to Pittsburgh. They lost a young-ish tight end, right, to the Jets. They lost another tight end to the Saints. All they did was get older. And again, they did make a good signing in Zadarius Smith, and they made a potentially good signing in Jordan Hicks. And obviously, again, it can come back looking like a fantastic deal that they got Patrick Peterson back on a 1-year, $4 million deal. I just don't think it's going to be. I just don't think it's going to work out. I think in a league, especially on defense, I think you need to get younger. And they really didn't. And the younger pieces that they did bring in didn't really help them get that much better. Then, where they did get younger is obviously where they put their, where they use their draft picks, right? I know that my biggest takeaway from it is I thought that they did something quite hilarious with, with what they did with the Packers, right? I think that they they stayed at 32 to get Louis Cine, the safety from Georgia, a guy that I was very, very high on. They stayed, to get him, and they could have the Packers were trying to trade into that 32 spot to wind up taking Christian Watson so they could get their 5th-year option on. The Vikings didn't do it. That was smart by them, because then they did that exact same trade for the 34th. And then they wound up getting, the 59th overall pick, and I think they wound up getting I believe there was one more pick in there. But then you look at what they did on defense. I actually do like their draft. They got Louis Cine, again, as I talked about. They got Andrew Booth, a cornerback from Clemson, who a lot of people had as a first-round guy. That was a good pick. Good pick by the front office. Then they got a lot of depth, which is what I think you need. They went very heavy defensively, right? In the second round, they wind up getting a guard, Ed Ingram, but then they get a linebacker. They get a cornerback, defensive end. They wound up getting, a little bit of offensive pieces. They got a running back. They got a tackle. They got a wide receiver in Jalen Naylor, who I really, really like. They got him in the 6th round. And then a tight end late. But their defense got better. I think their defense, obviously, as what happens when you draft young talent, they got better. They got better than they were last year on the player side of things. On the player side of things, for sure. One player who I'm not super keen on, that's Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is not a guy that I've ever really been super high on. I think that you saw last year he had his best statistical season, right? He went 33, or he had a 33-7 touchdown to interception. Those were his numbers. He was sacked 28 times, but that was down from the year previously, right? They had given up 39 sacks, or he'd been sacked 39 times the year previously. He passed for, his third or fourth most yards in his career. His completion percentage is slightly below average, but that's one that fluctuates. Kirk Cousins had his best season of his career, I would say, last year. I do think that there's going to be an adjustment period with this team. And that this is going to bleed into a little bit of what I think of the Vikings and why I have them ranked so low. It's going to take some time. Or let me stick on Kirk Cousins just for a little bit. Kirk Cousins is not good enough to lead a team. He's not good enough to lead a team. As I was saying, he had his best statistical season last year when it comes to touchdowns and interceptions. Most touchdowns he's ever thrown. And it was around, in seasons that he actually started, it was the second least interceptions he's thrown. The only season he had better was in 2019. And that was he went 26-6. And remember, they wound up winning the game at New Orleans off, if you want to call it the push off that Kyle Rudolph had against the Saints. I didn't think it was much of a push off, but that's the year they won that one. But this year, with Kirk Cousins at a start, because again, he did miss one game against Green Bay at the end of the year. They were 8-8. They were 8-8. They weren't super great with him. They weren't super great with Kirk Cousins, and I don't think that that's necessarily surprising. Their defense had been declining for a couple of years, and that's why I'm not super high on them. It's a quick explanation on Kirk Cousins in terms of I don't think he can, because I don't think the defense is going to be very good. So here, just speaking on the defense, they brought in an offensive head coach. And again, all these topics kind of tie in together. They brought in an offensive head coach. Here's the problem with that. Again, their offense was middle of the pack last year. In yards, I believe they were 12th. In points, they were around 14th. So they were middle of the pack. When it comes to defense, though, yards per game, they were third from the bottom. They were giving up about 383 yards per game. Up there with stout defenses like the Houston Texans, New York Jets, Detroit Lions, and Seattle Seahawks. But here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. Seahawks, 21.5 points per game. The Chiefs, they gave up a lot of yards, 21.4 points per game. The Vikings were all the way up at 25.1 points per game that they were allowing. That's not good, especially from a coach who was supposed to be your defensive mastermind, which is obviously why he's no longer their coach. They were they were bottom 9 is what I should say. Bottom 9 in points per game allowed. Again, alongside other stout defenses like the Giants, the Commanders, the Raiders, the Texans, the Jags. They weren't that good. The offense wasn't something that I don't think really needed to be tweaked with majorly. And again, I realize that, the entire way of thinking now is to go towards an offensive head coach. But I think I think they're fine offensively. I really do. I think, again, I'm not a huge fan of Kirk Cousins, but if you have Kirk Cousins, you have Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, you have 2 really good running backs, and in Alexander Madison and Dalvin Cook. I think that's all you needed. I think you were fine offensively. Maybe bring in a new coordinator if that's what you wanted to do. But I think defense was your issue. And yes, you can add all the talent you want. And you can add Zadarius Smith, and you can add, the new linebackers coach and Mike Smith. You can do that all you want. But you should have brought in a defensive head coach, in my opinion. I think, and especially when you look around that division, in terms of what teams are trying to do, Green Bay obviously is offense. That's Aaron Rodgers is offensively driven, right? Obviously. You look at the Lions. They don't have a quarterback right now, but they're loading up on weapons. And Green Bay is loaded up with talent defensively. The Lions are loading up with talent defensively. They now have 2, top 3 defensive picks on that side of the ball, Aiden Hutchinson and then Jeff Okudah, who they drafted a couple of years ago. They're loaded up with defensive talent. Then you go to the Bears. The Bears, I'm not a huge fan of their offense, but they're trying. They're trying on offense to get weapons to work their way up. I think that in this division, you're not very often, and Kirk Cousins, he does have an okay record against Aaron Rodgers as a member of the Vikings, but you need to be able to stop somebody. And I don't think the Vikings are going to be able to stop anyone. I truly don't think the Vikings are going to be able to stop anyone. And then when you talk about the offensive side of the ball, I think that with hiring this new offensive coach, they're going to take a bit. As I said earlier, they are going to take a little bit, and here's why. Kevin O'Connell, he came over from the Rams system. Who are some coaches that came over from the Rams system within the past couple of years? My 2 examples are going to be Matt LaFleur, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, and Zach Taylor, the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. And here is why I think that this is where you have a very good, comparison. If you look at these teams in the first year of their head coaches, and this is why I think they're going to start slow. When it comes to yards per game, the Packers were bottom half of the league their first year under LaFleur. When it came to points per game, they were right at mediocre. Maybe a little bit above mediocre, but they were right at mediocre. And this is with Aaron Rodgers we're talking about. This is with Aaron Rodgers. This is with Devontae Adams. This is with a young but Marquez Valdez-Scantling. This is with Aaron Jones scoring 20 touchdowns in 2019. And they were middle of the pack in points. But no, okay, but that's not let's not use that, let's not only use one example, right? But let's take a look. The Cincinnati Bengals, their first year of Zach Taylor, same as the first year of Matt LaFleur. The Bengals scored 17.4 points per game, but they, they didn't have Joe Burrow yet. That's why. Well, they still had Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton's okay. Vikings fans, Andy Dalton came in and beat you in your building last year, 2 years ago in 2020. Andy Dalton came into your building and beat you. He's solid. He's not, I don't think I think he's a borderline, he's like a Tyrod Taylor. But he's solid. 17.5 points per game. But let's just look at the physical games, right? Here, let's look at the Packers. It took them 5 weeks with Aaron Rodgers to finally score above 30 points, and that was in their 34-24 win against the Dallas Cowboys. But in that game, honestly, it's not like the Packers offense did anything special. The Cowboys imploded. And then if you take a look at the Bengals from that exact same year, it took the Bengals with Andy Dalton until week 16, the second to last week of the year, to finally score above 30. They scored 20, 17, 17, 3, 23, 17, 17, 10, 13, 10, 10, 22, 19, 13, then finally 35, and then 33. They were putrid. They started off 0-11. The only person who came out of the gates flying with this Sean McVay system was Sean McVay. Sean McVay was the only one. He in their first regular season game. And remember, this is with Jared Goff. Put up 46 points. 46 points in the first week against Indianapolis. And then, of course, they faltered the next week and only put up 20, but then they put up 41, 35. They led the league in points per game with almost 30 points a game with Jared Goff. I think that they're going to have a little bit of a learning curve. And that's not a bad thing, because look, 2020 for the Packers was fantastic, right? They led the league in offense. They were the best offense in the league. They got to the NFC Championship. They lost at home in the NFC Championship, but they put up 26 points in the NFC Championship. And then you look at the Bengals. The Bengals made it to the Super Bowl. I'm not saying that there's not a bright future there, but I'm saying that they're going to start off slow. They're going to start off slow, at least offensively. I think that their record might be a little bit better than the team actually is, but they have some tough games in here. Green Bay, Philadelphia. I think Detroit they'll probably get Detroit both times. I think they'll probably get the Bears both times. I have both of those teams obviously ranked below the Vikings. But they play the Saints. They play Miami, Arizona, Buffalo, Dallas, New England, depending on how you feel about them. Indianapolis, Green Bay again. I think they have a tough schedule. I do. I don't think they're playing the most tough divisions, obviously, right? The Vikings, the NFC North is playing the NFC East and the AFC East. Those aren't super tough divisions. But I think having to play Green Bay twice, obviously, having to play, and here's a different thing. Although the Vikings defense wasn't necessarily fantastic against Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers kind of had their number, but then it would kind of work the other way sometimes, where it's like Mike Zimmer had played against him so many times, so he kind of knew what to expect. Now you don't have that. The best you have is Mike Smith, their new outside linebackers coach, who coached for Green Bay for a couple of years. That's the best you have, right? It's going to take them a bit. It really is. Them starting off at home versus Green Bay. I think that game could honestly go either way, but I don't see that game necessarily being a shootout. I have Green Bay winning personally, but it could go either way. But I don't think it's going to be some, fantastic shootout. The Packers' first game under Matt LaFleur, they put up 10 points. They just got lucky that, they held the Bears to 3. It's going to take them a while, and that's fine. It's okay to take a while. I think we've gotten to the point, especially in the NFL, where it has to be instant gratification on everything, right? Has to be, the second you're in the league, you have to be fantastic straight out of the gate. And, I don't think it's necessarily that way. Not everyone's Sean McVay, where the first year in the system, your team's going to lead the league in offense. It just doesn't happen like that, right? It doesn't happen, quarterback wise. It always doesn't happen where you come in your first year starting, right? Like Patrick Mahomes, and you're just fantastic. There's Josh Allen's too. Right? Where he's not good for his first year and a half, 2 years. And then the switch flips. But yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit for another guy out of the Sean McVay system to be able to kind of get a grip on being a head coach in the NFL and having to go up against, Aaron Rodgers and the Packers and go up against, the Eagles and the Cowboys and Arizona and Washington. I don't think that they're too high, but they're going to be tough. And Detroit has, as I've talked about, they're really loaded on talent. They just don't have a quarterback. That's why I have the Vikings ranked so low. That's why I have them ranked once again at 21. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's a little bit weirder doing the show all by myself. Dallas is going to be on with me later tonight, I believe. We're going to be revealing, or we're going to be talking about the team that we have ranked 20th. We're getting in the top 20. And that's going to be a team that I, talked about the Vikings playing. It's going to be the Miami Dolphins. I think that that's a little shocking for some people to have the Dolphins that low. But I think again, as you guys will kind of see on this list, quarterback means something to me, or lack of quarterback means something to me. And I'm not a huge fan of Tua. But again, once again, if you would like to see any clips, if anything, please follow us on the socials at the C Team Pod on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, anything you could possibly think of. Of course, at the C Team Pod here on YouTube, at Emmitt J. Sevores for me on Instagram, Twitter. I think it's just at Sevores on TikTok. Follow my co-host at dallas.wick on Instagram, and then at Coach Dallas Wick on Twitter. We should have, again, an episode coming out tonight. We're going to be live streaming it. It's going to be the Dolphins, who we have ranked at 20. And then hopefully we should have some Mariners episodes coming out soon, because I am ready to unload on what the Mariners just did today against the Washington Nationals. So once again,